Zawadi had always known hard work. From the time she was a young girl growing up in the small village of Nyamira, she had learned that nothing in life came easy. Her hands were calloused from years of helping her mother in the fields, and her heart had been hardened by a life that rarely gave second chances. So when the opportunity came to work for Mr. and Mrs. Oduma in the city, Zawadi took it without hesitation. She knew their reputation, a family dripping in wealth but dry in kindness. Whispers around town spoke of Mr. Oduma's icy stares and Mrs. Oduma's sharp tongue, but Zawadi didn't care. She needed the job. She needed the money to send home to her younger siblings, who still slept on mats in their mud-walled hut. The Oduma estate was massive, almost like a castle towering over Marombe city. Golden gates, marble floors, chandeliers that sparkled like 1,000 stars. It was a world Zawadi had only seen in dreams. Yet inside, the house was as cold as a forgotten grave. Mr. Oduma barely spoke unless it was to bark an order. His presence filled the air with a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. Mrs. Oduma, always dressed in silk and jewels, treated Zawadi like she was invisible, unless something needed cleaning, polishing, or fixing immediately. There were no kind words, no thank yous, just endless demands. Still, Zawadi did her work with a quiet determination. She scrubbed floors until they shone, cooked meals she was never allowed to taste, and cared for the endless list of chores that never seemed to end. She told herself it was just a stepping stone, that every bucket washed and every sheet folded was a brick laid on the path to a better life. Yet, even with her strong spirit, some days broke her. Days when Mrs. Oduma criticized her for imagined mistakes, or when Mr. Oduma glared at her like she was a stain on their perfect life. Despite it all, Zawadi found a small light in the darkness. Tajiri, the Oduma's 6-year-old son. Left alone by his busy parents, Tajiri often wandered the vast, empty halls with a teddy bear in his arms and sadness in his eyes. From the first moment she met him, Zawadi's heart softened. She saw herself in the lonely little boy who just wanted someone to care. Every smile she coaxed from him, every laugh she pulled from his tiny chest, felt like a small victory, a small piece of love she was sneaking into a house built without it. In a place where she was nothing more than a shadow, Zawadi became Tajiri's warmth, his comfort, his silent protector. She didn't know then how deeply their bond would be tested. She didn't know that one day, when it mattered most, she would be the only one standing between life and death. Not for money, not for thanks, but because deep down, love was something even the coldest house couldn't kill. Tajiri was a small boy with big, curious eyes that always seemed to be searching for something he couldn't find. In a house full of riches, he lived like a ghost, wandering the empty halls with no one to notice him. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Oduma, were always too busy with business meetings, too busy with fancy parties, too busy to even ask their own son how his day had been. At first, Zawadi only watched from a distance, her heart aching every time she saw Tajiri sitting alone by the giant window, clutching his old teddy bear like it was his only friend. She understood that loneliness too well, the kind that wraps around you even when you're surrounded by people. One afternoon, when the sun poured into the kitchen like golden honey, Zawadi found Tajiri standing on a stool, trying to reach a jar of cookies high on the shelf. His little hands trembled as he stretched as far as he could, and for a moment, Zawadi froze, afraid he would fall. Quickly, she rushed over and caught him just as he lost his balance. Tajiri looked up at her with wide, surprised eyes, waiting for the scolding he was used to, but instead, Zawadi simply smiled and handed him a cookie. From that simple act of kindness, something beautiful began to grow. Each day after that, Tajiri started following Zawadi around the house. He would sit quietly as she scrubbed floors or fold laundry, asking endless questions about everything: where she came from, why she wore colorful scarves, what it felt like to live in a village. At first, Zawadi kept her distance, afraid of stepping out of line with the Odumas, But Tajiri's innocent laughter, the way he lit up when she answered his questions, melted her fears away. Slowly, carefully, she began to share little stories from her childhood, tales of chasing chickens through dusty fields, of climbing mango trees so high it felt like touching the sky. Tajiri would giggle and clap, begging for more stories. And in those moments, Zawadi wasn't just a maid, she was a friend, a storyteller, someone who finally made the great, empty mansion feel a little less lonely. They built secret traditions together, sneaking extra cookies after dinner, crafting paper boats to float in the fountain outside, making up silly songs while cleaning. Tajiri's face, once so sad and silent, started to glow with life again. Zawadi never spoke of their bond to Mr. or Mrs. Oduma, knowing they wouldn't care or might even forbid it. But in her heart, she knew what they had was special. She had found someone who needed her, not for her hands or her hard work, but for her kindness and her heart. And though no one else in that grand house noticed, Zawadi and Tajiri had quietly stitched together a small, unbreakable family of their own, one built on laughter, trust, and a love that neither money nor cruelty could ever buy. The weekend came with the kind of heat that wrapped around the skin and made the air feel heavy. Mr. and Mrs. Oduma decided to throw a lavish party by the river, inviting their rich friends to show off their wealth. The riverbank was decorated with colorful tents, tables piled high with food, and loud music that filled the air. Guests laughed and danced, holding glasses of sparkling drinks, while servants, including Zawadi, rushed back and forth to keep everything perfect. In the middle of all this noise and excitement, little Tajiri wandered around unnoticed, clutching his teddy bear as always, his small face lost among a sea of careless adults. Zawadi kept an eye on him as best she could while working, but with so many demands being shouted at her, she could not stay close. Tajiri, curious and restless, slowly drifted toward the river's edge, where the water shimmered under the bright sun. No one saw him as he crouched down to touch the cool water with his tiny fingers. No one noticed as his foot slipped on the muddy bank. There was no loud splash, no scream, just a quiet fall, and then Tajiri was gone, swallowed up by the deep, fast-moving river. The party roared on, glasses clinked, music blared, and people laughed louder than ever, blind to the danger just a few feet away. Mr. and Mrs. Oduma were too busy entertaining their guests, showing off their designer clothes and expensive jewelry. They didn't even glance around to check where their son was. It was as if he didn't exist. For a moment it seemed like no one would notice at all. The river, dark and strong, pulled Tajiri under again and again as he struggled, tiny hands splashing desperately above the surface. But something tugged at Zawadi's heart, a sudden chill that made her stop, tray still balanced in her hands. She scanned the crowd quickly, her chest tightening when she didn't spot Tajiri's familiar little figure. Panic flashing through her, she dropped the tray without a second thought and raced toward the river. Her eyes searched the water frantically until she saw it. A small splash, a desperate hand reaching up before disappearing again. Without hesitating, without even thinking about herself, Zawadi kicked off her shoes and dove into the river. The water was colder than she expected, swirling fiercely around her as she fought against the current. Her arms pumped harder than they ever had before, driven by pure fear and love. Somewhere beneath the surface, Tajiri was fighting too, and Zawadi knew she couldn't let him go. Not him, not the boy who had trusted her, who had found in her the warmth his own parents had denied him. The world above the water kept partying, clueless and careless, but deep in the river, a battle for life was happening, one that would change everything in ways no one could have imagined. The river was wild, its current stronger than it looked from the shore. Without thinking twice, Zawadi plunged into the deep water, her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. She didn't stop to call for help, didn't wait for someone else to notice. She just moved, fast and fearless, because she knew that every second mattered. The cold water bit at her skin and dragged at her legs, but she pushed through, her eyes locked on the small hand that had briefly appeared before slipping under again. Tajiri was somewhere in that dark water, fighting alone, and she wasn't going to let him lose. The river's pull was powerful, almost tearing her away from where she needed to go. Her arms and legs screamed with the effort, but she kept swimming, desperate, driven by something stronger than fear. She gasped for breath and dove under again and again, searching through the murky depths, her heart sinking with every moment that passed. Then finally, through the cloudy water, she caught a glimpse of him, his little body floating just beneath the surface, his arms limp. With a cry from deep in her soul, Zawadi surged forward and grabbed Tajiri, wrapping him tightly against her. He was so small, so still, and it terrified her more than anything else in the world. Holding him close, she kicked toward the shore, fighting the river's grip with everything she had. Every stroke felt heavier, every breath harder, but giving up wasn't an option. She would not lose him. She could not lose him. The guests still hadn't noticed. They danced and laughed, their backs turned to the water, oblivious to the life and death struggle just meters away. Mr. and Mrs. Oduma stood proudly among them, sipping their expensive drinks, not even sparing a glance for their missing child. Zawadi's muscles burned, and for a terrifying second, it felt like the river might win. But then she thought of Tajiri's bright smile, the way he laughed at her silly songs, and that memory gave her the strength she needed to push harder. Finally, with one last desperate effort, Zawadi's feet touched the muddy bottom of the riverbank. She stumbled, coughing and gasping, dragging Tajiri's lifeless form onto the shore. Her hands shook as she tilted his tiny head back, desperately doing everything she could remember to help him breathe. Tears blurred her vision as she pressed against his chest, begging him to wake up, whispering his name over and over. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The world stood still. Then, with a weak cough, Tajiri spluttered, water pouring from his mouth. His small body jerked and he began to cry, soft at first, then louder, stronger. Relief flooded Zawadi so powerfully that she almost collapsed beside him. She scooped him into her arms, holding him close, rocking him gently as tears streamed down her face. He was alive. She had found him. She had saved him, and nothing else in the world mattered. The moment Zawadi pulled Tajiri onto the muddy shore, the air changed. It was like time had suddenly slowed down. Someone finally noticed and screamed, and within seconds, the once lively party turned into chaos. Guests dropped their glasses, running toward the riverbank in panic, their fancy shoes sinking into the soft ground. Shouts filled the air, people calling for help, for a doctor, for anyone, but no one knew what to do. In the middle of all the noise, Zawadi stayed focused, her hands trembling but steady, her mind racing back to the lessons her late mother had taught her years ago. Her mother, a village nurse, had always told her, "When a life is in your hands, you must act. Fear is not your friend." Those words echoed in Zawadi's heart as she gently placed Tajiri on his back, brushing his wet hair away from his face. He was so still, so frighteningly pale, and every second that passed felt like a lifetime. Dropping to her knees, Zawadi tilted his head back carefully, just like her mother had taught her. She pinched his nose closed and gave him 2 small breaths, praying with every fiber of her being that he would come back to her. Then she began the chest compressions, pressing down in a steady rhythm, counting silently in her mind. The world around her disappeared, the cries, the running feet, the gasps from the rich guests who had never seen such desperation up close. Even Mr. and Mrs. Oduma stood frozen a few feet away, their faces pale with horror, realizing for the first time just how close they had come to losing their son. Zawadi didn't care about them. She didn't care about anything except Tajiri. She pushed and breathed, refusing to give up. "Come on, Tajiri," she whispered hoarsely, tears mixing with the river water on her cheeks. "Come back to me, little one. Please." Just when the fear in her heart began to turn into despair, Tajiri let out a small cough, weak but real, then another. His tiny body jerked, and suddenly he was vomiting up river water, gasping for air. A cry broke from Zawadi's lips as she lifted him gently into her arms, rocking him back and forth, whispering soft words of comfort. Around them, the crowd stood stunned into silence, watching the maid they had always overlooked breathe life back into the child they had barely cared for. It was a moment so raw, so powerful, that even the richest, coldest hearts could feel it deep inside. But Zawadi wasn't thinking about them. Her entire world was the small boy in her arms, clinging weakly to her shirt, his tiny fists grasping the only person who had truly fought for him. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. As Tajiri slowly regained his breath, clinging tightly to Zawadi, a wave of relief washed over the crowd. Some guests clapped awkwardly, others murmured praises, but Mr. Oduma's face twisted into something dark and ugly. Instead of stepping forward to thank Zawadi, instead of wrapping his son in his arms, Mr. Oduma's voice cut through the air like a knife. "How could you let this happen?" he roared, pointing a shaking finger straight at her. Zawadi, still kneeling in the mud, her arms around Tajiri, looked up at him in shock, unable to understand what she was hearing. The guests froze, exchanging uneasy glances. Mrs. Oduma rushed to Tajiri's side, snatching him away from Zawadi's embrace as if she were the enemy. Tajiri whimpered, reaching back for Zawadi, but his mother didn't notice, too busy fussing over his wet clothes and hair. Mr. Oduma kept ranting, his voice growing louder and crueler. He accused Zawadi of negligence, of failing to watch Tajiri properly. He claimed that if she had been doing her job, the boy would have never fallen into the river in the first place. His words were sharp, humiliating, and full of anger, not at the situation, but at having his pride wounded in front of his wealthy friends. Zawadi sat there, soaked and shivering, still catching her breath, unable to believe what was happening. She had just risked her life to save his son, and instead of even a simple thank you, she was being blamed. Her heart ached, not just from the cold or exhaustion, but from the deep injustice of it all. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but her throat closed up. No words came out. Without giving her a chance to explain, Mr. Oduma turned to the stunned guests and announced loudly, "This girl's carelessness almost cost my son his life. She is fired. Immediately." Gasps echoed among the partygoers, but no one dared to speak against him. No one dared to stand up for her. Mrs. Oduma nodded sharply in agreement, her eyes cold and hard. It was done. Just like that, the woman who had saved Tajiri's life was thrown away like she meant nothing. A few guests looked uncomfortable, some even turned away, ashamed to witness such cruelty. But Mr. Oduma didn't care. He straightened his expensive jacket, smoothed his hair, and forced a smile as he ushered the guests back toward the party, pretending everything was fine. The music started again, awkward and hollow, trying to cover the ugliness that had just been exposed. Zawadi stood slowly, her knees weak, her heart even weaker. She glanced at Tajiri one last time. The boy's eyes were wide with confusion and sadness as he reached out toward her, but his mother held him tight, turning his face away. With a deep breath, Zawadi turned and walked away from the river, from the house, from everything she had given her heart to, leaving behind a world that had never truly seen her worth. As Zawadi turned away, her heart shattered into pieces. A voice rose above the shallow music and fake laughter. It was strong, commanding, the kind of voice that made everyone freeze where they stood. "Enough!" the voice bellowed. The guests turned in shock to see Mama Adisa, a woman known across the region for her power, wealth, and fierce sense of justice, stepping forward. She was not just any guest. She was a woman whose words could change lives, and whose presence demanded respect. Her eyes, sharp and furious, locked onto Mr. Oduma, like a hawk spotting its prey. The music died once again, and a heavy silence fell over the party. Mama Adisa marched toward the riverbank, her long dress flowing behind her like a queen's robe. She pointed straight at Zawadi, who stood trembling, soaked and heartbroken. "I saw everything," Mama Adisa declared loudly. "While you were busy showing off your wealth and entertaining your friends, this girl risked her life, to save your son. And this is how you repay her?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some people nodding, others looking down in shame. Mr. Oduma's face turned red with anger and embarrassment, but Mama Adisa was just getting started. She turned to the guests, sweeping her arm out wide. "All of you, standing here, clapping your hands and sipping your drinks. None of you moved when the boy fell into that river. None of you even noticed. It was Zawadi, the maid you all ignored, who jumped in without a second thought." Tajiri, still in Mrs. Oduma's arms, began to cry again, reaching for Zawadi, making the truth even more painful to watch. Mama Adisa's voice softened a little as she walked over to Zawadi. She placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, a simple act that felt like the warmest hug. "This girl is a hero," Mama Adisa said firmly, "and you should be thanking her on your knees instead of throwing her out like trash." The guests looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight, avoiding eye contact. The atmosphere of the party had completely changed. Whispers started to rise. Some people were even pulling out their phones, recording the scene. Mr. Oduma tried to argue, stuttering about responsibility and negligence, but Mama Adisa cut him off sharply. "Negligence? The only negligence here is yours, Mr. Oduma. If you had cared even half as much for your son as you do for your reputation, none of this would have happened." The shame on Mr. and Mrs. Oduma's faces was clear, but it was too late to fix it. Mama Adisa turned to Zawadi and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Come with me, child. You deserve better than this place. You deserve to be honored, not insulted." And just like that, with her head held high and Mama Adisa's arm around her shoulders, Zawadi walked away from the river, not as a disgraced maid, but as a hero who had finally been seen. The next morning, the sun had barely risen when the videos started spreading like wildfire. Someone from the party had secretly recorded the whole scene. Zawadi's brave jump into the river, her desperate struggle to pull Tajiri out, and even the way she performed CPR with trembling hands, while the guests stood frozen. Another clip showed Mr. Oduma's cold, cruel act of firing her in front of everyone. Within hours, the videos flooded social media, gathering thousands, then millions of views. People were furious. Comment sections exploded with anger. "How could a father fire the woman who saved his child's life?" one comment read. "Zawadi is the true angel here," said another. News stations picked up the story almost instantly. Headlines flashed everywhere. "Maid hero shamed by heartless family." Talk shows debated it fiercely. Journalists camped outside the Oduma's grand mansion, demanding answers. Everywhere Mr. and Mrs. Oduma turned, there were cameras, microphones, and angry voices shouting at them. The same people who used to envy their wealth now pointed fingers and shook their heads in disgust. Mr. Oduma tried to do damage control. He released a stiff, cold statement claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but it was too late. Screenshots of his harsh words to Zawadi at the party went viral. Memes flooded the internet, showing pictures of him with captions like "Fired the hero" and "Rich in money, poor in heart." Sponsorship deals started dropping them. Invitations to exclusive events vanished. Even old friends stopped picking up their calls. Meanwhile, Zawadi became a symbol of pure bravery and kindness. People from all walks of life, teachers, nurses, even police officers, shared their own stories online about being mistreated despite doing the right thing. They called it the Zawadi effect. Some artists even painted beautiful portraits of her, showing her holding Tajiri in her arms like a warrior carrying the future. Donations started pouring in from all around the world, with people writing heartfelt messages thanking Zawadi for reminding everyone that true courage comes from the heart, not from money or status. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a hero, a symbol of hope, and a living reminder that goodness will always shine, no matter how dark the world tries to be. The Odumas could only watch helplessly as their perfect image crumbled before their eyes, all because they had failed to see the value of a young woman with a heart of gold. Amid the storm of public outrage, a beautiful light began to shine for Zawadi. Mama Adisa, true to her word, didn't just walk away after defending her at the party. She invited Zawadi into her home, treating her not as a servant, but as someone precious, someone who deserved the world. For the first time in her life, Zawadi slept in a soft, warm bed without fear of being shouted at in the morning. She woke up to smiles, to respect, and to opportunities she had never even dared to dream of before. One morning, as they sat together under the big mango tree in Mama Adisa's garden, Mama Adisa looked at her with kind eyes and said, "Zawadi, you have the heart of a lioness. You deserve more than just survival. You deserve to soar." She handed Zawadi a thick envelope. Inside there were papers, scholarship documents for one of the best colleges in the country, full tuition, living expenses, everything covered. Zawadi's hands trembled as she read through them, tears filling her eyes. She had always dreamed of studying nursing, of helping people the way her late mother had helped their village, but life had always pulled her dreams away, until now. But Mama Adisa didn't stop there. She also offered Zawadi a job at her own foundation, working with children from poor backgrounds, giving them hope and support just like she had needed once. Zawadi couldn't believe it. She wasn't being given charity. She was being trusted, empowered, and seen for her true worth. Word of Zawadi's new life spread almost as fast as the video had. People celebrated her victory. Schools invited her to speak about bravery and kindness. Little girls looked up to her like a role model. For the first time, Zawadi wasn't invisible. She was a light for others, showing them that no matter how people treat you, your goodness will never go unseen by the right hearts. And every time Zawadi thought about giving up, every time the memories of how the Odumas had treated her tried to creep back into her mind, she held on to Mama Adisa's words. "You are not where you came from, Zawadi. You are where you choose to go." With every step she took toward her new dreams, Zawadi carried those words in her heart like a shield, ready to embrace a future filled with dignity, hope, and endless possibilities. Years passed, but the story of Zawadi and her bravery never faded. She worked hard, dedicating herself to her studies and then her career as a pediatric nurse. She rose through the ranks, always striving to be the best version of herself, fueled by the memory of that day by the river, and by the kind words of Mama Adisa, who had seen the potential in her when no one else had. Zawadi's patients adored her, especially the children. Her gentle touch, the way she listened to their fears, and her endless kindness made her a beloved figure in the hospital. Zawadi wasn't just a nurse, she was a healer of hearts as well as bodies. Meanwhile, Tajiri, the little boy Zawadi had saved, had grown up into a young man. He had always carried the weight of that day in his heart, the day when the woman who was supposed to be invisible had risked everything to save his life. His parents had tried to bury the past, but Tajiri never forgot. He grew up with a deep sense of gratitude and respect for Zawadi, the woman who had shown him what real courage and kindness looked like. Tajiri had excelled in school, his heart driven by the memory of Zawadi's selflessness. Now, as a young man, he stood at the pinnacle of success, both in his career and in life. One sunny afternoon, there was an announcement on social media. Tajiri, now a successful businessman, was hosting a charity gala for children's health. The surprise of the evening came when, in front of hundreds of guests, Tajiri stood up to speak. He shared his story, the story of the day he almost drowned, of how Zawadi had saved him without a second thought. He spoke of the shameful way his parents had treated her, and how, over the years, he had realized how wrong they had been. Tajiri's voice trembled with emotion as he turned to the audience. "I am here today because of one woman. She saved my life, but more than that, she gave me something I could never repay. Hope. When the world didn't see her, I did. I will never forget that." The room went silent, and then, In a moment that left everyone in tears, Tajiri called Zawadi to the stage. The audience erupted in applause as Zawadi, now a confident, graceful woman in her white nurse's uniform, walked to the front. She stood before him, humble and strong, the woman who had not just saved a life, but had inspired a generation. In that moment, Tajiri knelt before Zawadi, honoring her in front of everyone. He presented her with an award for bravery, calling her his true hero. The tears Zawadi held back spilled over, her heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just a public acknowledgement. This was everything, her past, her struggles, and her dreams coming full circle. Zawadi had gone from being the ignored maid to the woman who changed lives, including her own. And as Tajiri stood by her side, Zawadi knew that the love and respect she had fought for had finally found her in the most unexpected, beautiful way. If you found Zawadi's story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that remind us of the power of kindness and courage.